Nintendo Entertainment System.
Immersion. That's the word that I would use to describe Dead Space. Visceral Games' masterpiece of sci-fi horror. It's beloved by so many, and it absolutely deserves all of that love. When a remake was announced, I was absolutely thrilled. As someone who's always loved survival horror, it's always been very near and dear to my heart, and seeing 3 of my favourite games of all time being remade, all within the same year, made me so incredibly happy. Survival horror has always been my favourite genre, and to me Dead Space is the pinnacle of it. Sure, Resident Evil and Silent Hill are beloved by many, including myself, but when those games started to slip from their roots during the 7th generation, Dead Space brought survival horror back into the AAA space, and there really isn't anything like it to this day, from gameplay to atmosphere to story. I really want to talk about what makes these 2 games such a special experience. What? No, there was never a 3rd Dead Space game, what are you talking about? You're Isaac Clarke. On board the SS Ishimura. You're alone. The ship's crew have been overtaken by Lovecraftian creatures called necromorphs. You're walking down a dark, dimly lit hallway. The only sound you can hear is the stepping of your clunky mechanical engineering suit boots. In your hand, a repurposed engineering tool, not made for combat, just as awkward looking as your suit really. The lights flicker, and you see the walls covered in blood, and in the distance, you hear something inhuman. That's the kind of horror that Dead Space perfected. You feel claustrophobic and trapped on the ship, alone. It also helps that there's almost nothing that takes you out of this game world. There's no HUD, your ammo is displayed on your weapon as a hologram. Whenever you need your inventory, it's projected in front of Isaac, again as a hologram. Your health bar, it's literally on Isaac's back. Almost all of Dead Space is taken in one shot as well, something that its sequel later completely perfected, and something that God of War in 2018 would tout as a selling point when Dead Space did it 10 years earlier. God of War technically didn't even do it right, considering how shot menus and inventories look in that game, but that's a whole different topic of discussion. The point I'm making here is that Dead Space is immersive. Nothing ever takes you out of this game, and every single piece of gameplay is completely contextualized within its world, and it leads to the player being truly sucked into it. There's no escape from this claustrophobic, Ridley Scott-like horror. But my favourite aspect of Dead Space? It's in the name. The second word. Space. Sure, most of the time, you're spent slowly walking and exploring the ship filled with dead, but where this game really innovates is how it plays with the fact that this is in space. There are low gravity sequences, and oxygen plays a factor in these sequences too. What I love most about the space sequences? Listen. you hear that? Exactly. Nothing. Space feels silent, cold, uncaring, and most importantly, deadly. It really adds to this feeling of hopeless loneliness that Dead Space is trying to accomplish. Every single aspect of this game is tailor-made to scare the shit out of you, and I would not have that any other way. And speaking of silence, in the first game, Isaac, the protagonist, doesn't even talk, which leads to just as much suspense because of that. The audio here sets itself apart from other survival games as well because of its sheer realism. It knows when to be silent and it knows when to be loud. It knows how to make the player paranoid, and that's one of the best accomplishments that you can give to a game like this. I think it says a lot that the sound design is at its best when it completely vanishes during those space sequences. And then there's the enemies. The aforementioned necromorphs. These things look horrific. A twisted and defiled human body. It almost feels like a parody of a typical zombie. What really adds to the effect is that headshots aren't even really useful in this game. Instead, as a subversion of the genre, you shoot the limbs from these barely human creatures, the arms, the legs. You're forced to rip the limbs from these creatures, and then in some instances, you throw them straight back at them, using the kinesis granted by your rig. It's gross, honestly. Fun as hell as a player, but it's gross to walk around stomping on these corpses to make sure that they're dead after amputating them. This game is incredible. It has a detailed world, immersive gameplay, fantastic audio, and a fun story that I barely even talked about with many twists and turns. It's a masterpiece of horror, and certainly of gaming as a whole. Then, they somehow topped it with a sequel. Dead Space 2 takes everything that made the first game so innovative and unique, and it absolutely doubled down and expanded upon all of it. Bigger set pieces, bigger setting, bigger range of necromorphs, and honestly there's so many things that I want to talk about in this second game. I actually recommend Jacob Geller's video on Dead Space 2, as he summarises the sheer scope of this game much better than I ever could. But the title of his video specifically is completely right. Dead Space 2 feels like a modern day game. The reason why it doesn't have a remake is because it simply doesn't need one. They managed to create a game on 7th generation consoles that runs smoothly, even with borderline Uncharted level set pieces. But what makes that so impressive is that, as I said before, this game has absolutely no loading screens and it's all done in a single shot. As I said earlier, it's impressive as hell, and even to this day it's something that's incredibly difficult to accomplish. There's so many moments in this game, specific scenes or events that just make this game so memorable. The school area, the eye scene, the apartment area, the cathedral, and of course, the return back to the Ishimura. It's a sequel that takes everything that the first game was and only builds, only expands on its foundation. It refuses to take anything away. It's relentlessly replayable and absolutely worth your time, just like its predecessor. There's so much more to say about this franchise. Honestly, too much for one video, and I had to actually cut a lot from this video, to be completely honest. I have so much to say about this game, and I feel like I've barely even scratched the surface. For now, all I can say is that I'm happy to know that this series isn't completely dead. After the third game was forced to be something that it was never meant to be. I do hope that this remake is successful, and hopefully if it's successful enough, we'll be able to get some kind of continuation of this series, because I think it would be welcome nowadays with how much more popular survival horror games now are in the AAA gaming space. Dead Space is unlike any other game that I've played. It's something special, and its uniqueness keeps me thinking about it and coming back to it, and I think it will for a very long time. This video was somewhat rambly and all over the place, but I'm just happy to talk about this franchise that I've loved for a very long time, and I thought was dead and gone. I'm proud of this video though, and I hope to upload a little bit more consistently going forward. Thank you for watching.